The Thalaxian Dominion operated on the principle that everything in the universe could be properly categorized, filed, and dealt with through appropriate bureaucratic channels. This was a comforting belief system that had served them well for approximately 4,000 years, give or take a few genocides. Their empire stretched across 19 star systems, each one conquered through a delightfully systematic process that began with threat assessment and ended with either tribute collection or complete obliteration. The beauty of the Thalaxian system lay in its elegant simplicity. Every species they encountered was assigned a threat level based on a carefully calibrated color-coding scheme that would have made any mid-level administrator weep with joy. Red level indicated immediate existential threat requiring full military response. Orange suggested significant concern warranting preemptive strikes. Yellow meant potential future problems that should be monitored closely. Green represented useful but harmless species, suitable for tribute extraction or slavery. And then there was beige level, which was essentially the galactic equivalent of filing something under miscellaneous junk drawer items and forgetting it existed. Humans had been classified as beige level for the past 6 months, which represented roughly 5 months and 3 weeks longer than anyone at the Threat Assessment Bureau had actually spent thinking about them. The initial report, filed by junior analyst Nixel-4 during what appeared to be a particularly slow Tuesday, had noted their species designation as Homo sapiens, terrestrial origin, recently achieved interstellar capability, primary activities appear to be agriculture, and complaining about weather. This assessment had seemed reasonable at the time, primarily because Nixel-4 had been trying to finish his paperwork before lunch and hadn't particularly cared about some backwater species whose greatest technological achievement was apparently making plants grow in dirt. The problem with filing entire civilizations under beige level, ignore until further notice, was that sometimes those civilizations had the audacity to do interesting things when nobody was paying attention. Director Kothzelix discovered this unfortunate reality during his monthly review of territorial expansion reports, which was already shaping up to be the sort of tedious bureaucratic nightmare that made him question his career choices. The Thalaxian Dominion's borders had remained static for the past 18 months, which was unprecedented in their recorded history and frankly embarrassing for an empire built on systematic conquest. "Explain to me," Kothzelix said slowly, his 4 eyes focusing on the holographic display with the sort of intensity usually reserved for tax audits and performance reviews. "Why there are 17 new human colonies in sectors we marked for future expansion." Nixel-4 shuffled his data tablets nervously, which was impressive considering he had 6 arms and therefore multiple options for expressing anxiety. "Sir, the humans appear to have been expanding." Expanding. Kothzelix repeated the word as if it contained some complex philosophical concept that required careful consideration. "Beige-level species don't expand, Nixel-4. They sit in their designated systems and engage in whatever pointless activities beige-level species do. They certainly don't establish 17 colonies in strategically valuable systems. The reports indicate they're using the colonies primarily for agricultural purposes." "Sir, agriculture." Another pause for consideration. "And you see nothing concerning about a species that can establish 17 functioning colonies in 18 months for the sole purpose of growing. What exactly are they growing?" Nixel-4 consulted his tablets with the desperate efficiency of someone whose career was currently circling the drain. "Various food crops, sir. Corn, wheat, something called soybeans, and turnips." The silence that followed was the sort of silence that made junior analysts update their resumes and consider career changes. "They're growing turnips," Kothzelix said finally. "In our space, without permission. Technically, sir, we hadn't formally claimed those systems yet. That is not the point." Kothzelix's voice rose to the sort of pitch that suggested imminent violence, or at least a very strongly worded memorandum. "The point is that no species, regardless of threat level, establishes colonies without proper authorization from the Thalaxian Dominion. It's a matter of principle. And so, through the inexorable machinery of bureaucratic pride and the sort of logical reasoning that made perfect sense to committee-minded individuals, humanity found itself scheduled for what the Thalaxian Dominion euphemistically called administrative correction. This was where the Extinction Protocol specialists came into play. The EPS program was the Thalaxian Dominion's answer to the age-old question of how to efficiently murder entire civilizations without getting your hands dirty. Rather than deploy messy armies or wasteful orbital bombardments, they had developed a more elegant solution. Genetically engineered assassins designed to eliminate key leadership figures and demoralize target populations into submission. Each EPS unit was a masterwork of biological engineering, combining the best aspects of various predator species with enough artificial enhancement to make them essentially unstoppable. They were fast, smart, adaptable, and equipped with enough integrated weaponry to level a small city if necessary. The crown jewel of this program was Vex-Prime, designation EP-S Alpha 7, whose service record read like a greatest hits compilation of galactic genocide. 17 civilizations pacified, 43 planetary governments eliminated, over 2,000 confirmed high-value target eliminations, and a perfect mission success rate that was the envy of every other killing machine in the galaxy. Vex-Prime was, in the most technical sense possible, the perfect organism for ending things that needed to be ended. Meanwhile, roughly 2,000 light-years away on Harvest Moon Colony, Magnus Thornfield was engaged in what he considered to be a life-or-death struggle against late blight in his tomato crop. "You microscopic little bastards," he muttered, examining the telltale brown spots on his prized tomato plants with the sort of focused intensity usually reserved for military strategy or advanced mathematics. "Think you can ruin my harvest? I've got news for you." Magnus Thornfield was what polite society might call a career change, success story, and what his former colleagues at Meridian Engineering Solutions would call the guy who lost his damn mind and went to grow vegetables on an alien moon. Both descriptions were technically accurate, though Magnus preferred to think of it as a rational response to 30 years of dealing with corporate bureaucracy and malfunctioning fusion reactors. 3 years ago, he had been senior systems engineer Magnus Thornfield, responsible for maintaining life support systems on orbital stations and occasionally preventing them from exploding in ways that would make the evening news. It had been steady work, well-paid, and utterly soul-crushing in the way that only truly meaningful employment could be. The breaking point had come during a particularly tedious safety meeting about the proper procedures for reporting improper procedures, at which point Magnus had experienced what psychologists might call a moment of clarity and everyone else would call a complete mental breakdown. He had stood up in the middle of the meeting, announced that he was going to grow vegetables on an alien world, and walked out. 2 weeks later, he had liquidated his retirement savings, purchased a transport ticket to the newest human agricultural colony, and traded his engineering credentials for 40 acres of untamed alien soil and a comprehensive guide to interstellar farming. His former colleagues had predicted disaster. His family had suggested therapy. His financial advisor had required sedation. 3 years later, Magnus Thornfield grew the best damn vegetables in the outer colonies, had never been happier, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of soil chemistry that would have impressed his old engineering professors if they could have gotten past the part where he was using it to grow turnips. The late blight situation was serious business, though. Harvest season was 3 weeks away, and Magnus had pre-orders for his tomatoes from every restaurant and food distributor within 5 systems. Losing his crop now would be financially catastrophic and personally devastating, which meant the blight had to go. He spent the morning applying organic fungicide treatments and adjusting his greenhouse climate controls with the sort of methodical precision that had once been reserved for fusion reactor maintenance. The afternoon was devoted to soil pH testing and nutrient supplementation. By evening, he was cautiously optimistic that he had caught the problem in time to save most of his crop. It was during this evening inspection, as Magnus was checking his potato beds and making notes about harvest timing, that Vex-Prime arrived. The EPS unit's insertion had been flawless, as expected. Stealth pod deployment during the colony's night cycle, perfect atmospheric entry, landing in a remote agricultural zone exactly 17 kilometers from the primary settlement. Every detail had been calculated for maximum efficiency and minimal detection probability. What the mission planners hadn't calculated for was the fact that Harvest Moon Colony didn't actually have a primary settlement in any meaningful sense. It was 43 individual farms scattered across 3 continents, connected by nothing more than a rudimentary communication network and a shared interest in growing things in alien soil. Vex-Prime's first indication that this mission might not proceed, according to standard parameters, came when his target identification systems failed to locate anything resembling a command structure, military installation, or government facility. Instead, his senses detected what appeared to be an endless series of agricultural plots, residential structures, and storage buildings. His second indication came when he realized that his assigned target, Magnus Thornfield, was apparently the colony's administrative coordinator, which in Thalaxian terms should have indicated a position of significant authority and strategic importance. Further reconnaissance revealed that Magnus's administrative duties consisted primarily of organizing seed exchanges, mediating disputes about irrigation water, and maintaining the colony's agricultural equipment sharing schedule. Vex-Prime had been designed to eliminate galactic emperors, military commanders, and industrial leaders. He was not particularly equipped to process the concept of killing someone whose greatest responsibility was making sure the communal tractor got returned on time. Nevertheless, orders were orders, and Vex-Prime had not achieved his perfect success rate by allowing personal confusion to interfere with mission objectives. If the Thalaxian Dominion wanted Magnus Thornfield eliminated, then Magnus Thornfield would be eliminated, regardless of whether it made tactical sense. He spent 6 hours in reconnaissance, observing his target's routine and identifying optimal elimination opportunities. Magnus appeared to follow a consistent pattern: early morning inspection of greenhouse facilities, midday fieldwork, afternoon equipment maintenance, and evening crop monitoring. He worked alone, carried no weapons, and showed no awareness of basic security protocols. It would have been almost disappointingly easy if Vex-Prime hadn't been. Increasingly puzzled by the target's behavior, Magnus moved through his routine with the sort of focused efficiency that suggested significant competence. But competence at what? Growing vegetables, managing dirt, ensuring that plants received adequate water. For a being engineered to eliminate threats to galactic civilization, the concept of killing someone for being exceptionally good at agriculture felt somewhat inappropriate. But again, orders were orders. Vex-Prime selected the evening crop inspection as his optimal elimination window. Target would be isolated, distracted, and positioned in open terrain, with multiple escape routes available for post-elimination extraction. Standard approach: dramatic reveal, intimidation display, quick elimination, evidence of Thalaxian involvement, extraction before dawn. Simple, clean, professional. What actually happened was considerably different. Magnus was kneeling beside his potato beds, checking soil moisture levels and making notes about harvest timing, when a 7-foot-tall nightmare emerged from the shadows between his greenhouse modules. Magnus Thornfield, Vex-Prime announced, his biomechanical voice carrying the sort of authority usually associated with natural disasters and judicial proceedings. I am Vex-Prime, Extinction Protocol Specialist of the Thalaxian Dominion. Your species has violated territorial boundaries. Your elimination has been authorized. Magnus looked up from his soil moisture readings with the expression of someone who had just been interrupted during something actually important. Extinction Protocol Specialist, he repeated slowly, as if testing the words for structural integrity. That's a hell of a job title. You must have some interesting business cards. This was not the response Vex-Prime had been expecting. Most targets either begged for mercy, attempted to flee, or made futile threats. None of them had ever commented on his professional designation with what sounded, suspiciously, like amusement. Your death will serve as a warning to other human colonies. Vex-Prime continued, deploying his integrated weapon systems in what should have been an impressive display of lethal capability. The Thalaxian Dominion does not tolerate unauthorized expansion. Magnus glanced at the various plasma cannons, micro-missile launchers, and energy weapons that had just emerged from Vex-Prime's biomechanical frame, then returned his attention to his soil readings. Unauthorized expansion, he mused. Right. And I suppose you're here to authorize my stopping. Your elimination will be swift and efficient. I'm sure it will be. Magnus stood up, brushing soil from his knees and reaching for his gardening tools. There's just one small problem with your plan. Explain. Magnus picked up his shovel and tested its weight with the casual expertise of someone who had spent 3 years using it for its intended plant purpose. You see, harvest season starts in 3 weeks. I've got 40 acres of crops that need to be brought in, pre-orders from 5 different systems, and a late blight situation in my tomatoes that I'm still monitoring. He took a step closer to Vex-Prime, who found himself momentarily confused by this unexpected tactical development. So here's what's going to happen, Magnus continued conversationally. You're going to take your authorization and your territorial violations and your intimidation displays, and you're going to leave my farm. Because I don't have time for this nonsense, and harvest season waits for nobody. Vex-Prime's threat assessment systems were starting to throw up warning flags, though his logical processes couldn't quite identify why. The target was still standing in the open, still appeared to possess only primitive agricultural equipment, still showed no signs of calling for assistance or attempting to flee. You do not understand the situation, Vex-Prime said, raising his primary plasma cannon to target center. Mass. I am an engineered killing machine. You are a primitive agriculturalist with farming equipment. This encounter has only one possible outcome. Magnus looked at the plasma cannon pointed at his chest, then back at Vex-Prime's optical sensors, and smiled. It was not a particularly reassuring smile. You know what your problem is? He asked, shifting his grip on the shovel handle. You think like an engineer. Explain. See, engineers love to overcomplicate things. Give them a simple problem, and they'll design a complex solution with multiple redundancies and elegant mathematical models. Magnus took another step forward, now close enough that Vex-Prime's targeting systems were having difficulty maintaining optimal firing solutions. But farmers? We solve problems with whatever tools we have handy. What followed could technically be described as a battle between advanced alien technology and primitive human agricultural equipment, though that description would fail to capture the essential absurdity of the situation. Vex-Prime opened with his standard intimidation protocol, activating all weapon systems simultaneously while broadcasting his complete service record through his external speakers. The effect should have been overwhelming, a symphony of death backed by the sort of credentials that made galactic civilizations surrender without firing a shot. Instead, Magnus swung his shovel. Now, Vex-Prime had been engineered to handle conventional military threats. His reflexes were faster than human perception, his armor could deflect ship-grade weapons, and his tactical processors could calculate optimal responses to thousands of combat scenarios per microsecond, none of which had prepared him for the experience of being hit in the optical sensors with a farming implement wielded by someone who had spent 3 years digging irrigation trenches in variable gravity. The impact sent his targeting systems into recalibration mode, just as Magnus stepped inside his weapon reach and delivered what could charitably be called a precision strike to his primary power coupling. Vex-Prime's plasma cannon discharged harmlessly into the night sky as his entire left arm went offline. The thing about farming equipment, Magnus observed, using the shovel handle to block a micromissile launcher deployment, is that it's designed to break up hard-packed soil and cut through root systems. Turns out that makes it surprisingly effective against other hard things. Vex-Prime attempted to initiate his close combat protocols, which should have given him an overwhelming advantage in hand-to-hand combat. Unfortunately, his designers had optimized his systems for fighting other engineered warriors and military personnel, not agriculturalists who approached problem-solving with the sort of practical creativity that came from 3 years of making alien farming equipment work properly. Magnus ducked under a titanium-reinforced strike, used his shovel blade to redirect a plasma blast into Vex-Prime's own sensor array, and followed up with what could technically be described as an agricultural technique, if agricultural techniques included using farming tools to systematically dismantle advanced military hardware. Another thing about farming, Magnus continued, now thoroughly warmed up to both the physical exertion and the philosophical discussion, is that it teaches you patience, persistence, and creative problem-solving. When your irrigation system breaks down at 3 in the morning during a heat wave, you don't call customer service. You fix it with whatever you've got. He demonstrated this principle by using his shovel to pry open Vex-Prime's chest armor, and began systematically disconnecting whatever looked important inside. You also learn, Magnus added, reaching into Vex-Prime's internal systems and pulling out what appeared to be a primary processor core, that sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution. Vex-Prime made one final attempt to activate his emergency self-destruct sequence, which would have eliminated both himself and his target in a spectacular display of professional dedication. Instead, he found himself looking up at Magnus Thornfield, who was holding his main computational matrix in one hand and shaking his head with what appeared to be genuine disappointment. Self-destruct? Really? Magnus sighed and tossed the processor core into his compost bin. You engineers and your dramatic solutions. Sometimes a problem just needs to be solved, not turned into a philosophical statement. Vex-Prime, Extinction Protocol Specialist Alpha 7, terror of 17 civilizations and perfect killing machine of the Thalaxian Dominion, shut down with a sound like disappointed machinery and fell face first into a furrow between the potato rows. Magnus stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, and looking down at several hundred pounds of advanced military technology that was now taking up valuable space in his potato field. Then he shook his head, grabbed Vex-Prime's ankles, and began dragging the defunct assassin toward his equipment storage area. Biodegradable components, he muttered, noting the organic elements of Vex-Prime's biomechanical construction. That's something, at least. Probably make decent fertilizer once they break down properly. He spent the next hour systematically stripping anything useful from the alien technology. The power cells looked like they might be useful for his greenhouse heating system. The sensor arrays could probably be repurposed for soil monitoring, and the bioarmor components might work as protective covering for his more delicate crops. The weapon systems went into his spare parts bin with a note to figure out whether any of them could be converted for agricultural use. Plasma cannons might be useful for clearing stumps or dealing with particularly stubborn rocks, and the micro-missile launchers could probably be reprogrammed for controlled demolition of old root systems. By the time he finished, it was well past midnight. Magnus loaded his tools back into his cart, made a mental note to check his tomato blight situation first thing in the morning, and headed back to his cabin for some well-deserved sleep. Just another evening on the farm. 2,000 light-years away, Director Quoth-Zelix was experiencing what humans might recognize as the early stages of a nervous breakdown. Vex-Prime's communication beacon had gone dark 6 hours ago, which should have been mathematically impossible given his mission parameters and target assessment. Status report, he demanded, his 4 eyes focused on junior analyst Nixel 4 with the sort of intensity usually reserved for performance reviews and budget meetings. Sir, we've lost all contact with EPS Alpha 7. His last transmission was mission commencement confirmation, followed by complete communications blackout. Equipment malfunction? Negative, sir. Reconnaissance probe confirms no electromagnetic interference or communication jamming in the target zone. Quoth-Zelix felt the sort of sinking sensation that usually accompanied career-ending disasters and audit notifications. Send a survey drone. I want to know what happened to our extinction protocol specialist. The survey drone's initial reports were problematic. No evidence of military engagement, no signs of advanced defensive systems, no indication that the human colony had been aware of any threat. The only unusual reading was a slight increase in organic matter decomposition near the primary target's residence. Sir, Nixel 4 reported with the sort of nervous energy that suggested incoming professional catastrophe. The drone detected traces of EPS Alpha 7's biosignature in what appears to be a composting facility. A composting facility. Yes, sir. The humans appear to use it for recycling organic agricultural waste. Are you telling me? Quothzelek said, with the careful precision of someone trying very hard not to have a complete psychological breakdown, that our most advanced extinction protocol specialist was defeated by a primitive agriculturalist and disposed of in a garbage facility. Technically, sir, it's an organic waste recycling system designed to produce nutrient-rich soil amendments, but essentially, yes. The silence that followed was the sort of silence that made entire bureaucratic departments update their resumes and consider alternative career paths. Finally, Quothzelek activated his emergency communication array and transmitted a priority message to Thalaxian High Command: recommend immediate reclassification of human species. Suggest new designation: administratively inconvenient. Recommend policy adjustment: avoid all human agricultural zones until further notice. The response came back within hours: request approved. Humans reclassified as administratively inconvenient. All Thalaxian forces directed to route around human agricultural systems. Territorial disputes to be resolved through diplomatic channels and standard bureaucratic procedures. 1 year later, Magnus Thornfield's farm had become the most productive agricultural operation in the outer colonies. The alien technology had proven remarkably adaptable once he'd figured out how to integrate it with his existing systems. Vex-Prime's power cells had improved his greenhouse efficiency by 40%. The sensor arrays had revolutionized his soil monitoring capabilities, and the bioarmor components had made excellent protective covering for his more delicate crops during the harsh winter season. He was particularly proud of the herb garden he'd planted in Vex-Prime's skull, which had been converted into an excellent planter once he'd cleaned out all the technical components. The basil was thriving, and the oregano had never looked better. Meanwhile, throughout the galaxy, the Thalaxian Dominion had quietly updated their territorial expansion protocols. A new category had been added to their threat assessment system: administratively inconvenient, defined as species engaged in agricultural activities. Recommend diplomatic resolution of territorial disputes. Military intervention not cost-effective. The classified addendum to this designation, visible only to those with appropriate security clearance, included a single footnote: do not underestimate species that work with primitive tools for a living. They apparently know how to use them. And somewhere in the Thalaxian military archives, filed under lessons learned and administrative adjustments, sat the final report from the Harvest Moon incident. The conclusion, written by Director Quothzelek shortly before his reassignment to a monitoring station in an empty system, reads simply: some problems cannot be solved through superior technology and complex engineering. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, and that humor involves farmers with shovels. Magnus never learned that he had single-handedly altered the balance of power in his corner of the galaxy. He was too busy preparing for the spring planting season and wondering whether he should expand his operation to include livestock. After all, the outer colonies were always looking for fresh meat, and he had plenty of space now that he'd cleared out that annoying pest problem. The shovel, now hanging in a place of honor in his equipment shed, remained ready for the next time someone made the mistake of interrupting his work during harvest season.